Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Martin. I'm the city's Assistant Community Development Director. And so I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to come talk about the North End with us today. The zoning work that we're looking at, and Rita Trapp, who's our consultant from Hoyzington Kegler, will be walking through more information on the ordinance itself. But this started a couple of years ago, as maybe hopefully some of you are aware of. We created a vision plan after about a year of work. The city council adopted it in 2019. And since that time in 2019, really moving into 2020 and most of 2020 and a large part of this first half of the year, we've been working on creating the zoning ordinance to enact that vision from the North End. The zoning ordinance is the nuts and bolts of how we get this vision built. We work to make sure it meets the needs of the future, but also can accommodate existing buildings and modifications, remodels of existing buildings and uses. So we're not over prescriptive here, and Rita can get more into that. And with that, I'll hand it over to Rita to kind of lead us through our conversation today.
Great, thank you, Mike. So the purpose of this meeting, to just give you an overview, is to provide an overview and answer any questions that attendees may have. And I'm going to walk through a presentation. I'll probably stop in each section to see if there's any questions rather than running through the entire presentation, just because I know it's challenging at the end. But no, we will talk about a little overview and background, and then we'll dive into kind of the framework for the district and then dive into some of the details. Obviously, it's a zoning code, so there's a lot more details than we're able to cover in the presentation, but I certainly have copies of the code and can provide more information. So the purpose of the North End District is to implement the guidance for the North End area. As Michael mentioned, that is coming from the 2040 Comprehensive Plan and the North End Vision Plan, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute as part of the background. We did try and design the district with an acknowledged need for flexibility. We do understand that redevelopment will be phased. It's going to be market driven. There are many property owners in the area, and so the intention is to have some flexibility for existing structures and uses to continue because they may not transition immediately and it may take time. Overarching goal is to create a premier mixed-use area in Maplewood. In this area, there's the multimodal transportation access and the planned improvement of the BRT corridor. The hope is for high quality design to build on what the community already has in other areas nearby, and to really support the idea of greenways and open space for connectivity and to support a walkable, pedestrian focused area. So our agenda again is to talk about the existing North End area today, what is the vision for the North End, and then talk about the approach to the new zoning district. And then to clarify a little bit of next steps, we know that a typical process that folks are used to would really focus on a public hearing process, but we're not at that point right now. Right now we're doing outreach to talk to property owners, to let you know about what's happening and to solicit input for consideration as we move forward with consideration for the district regulations. So if I'm gonna talk a little bit about the existing North End area, which should be familiar, but then I'll stop to see if there are any questions at the end of this section. So the existing North End area, the North End was defined as part of the comprehensive plan, and it includes the area between County Road D and Beam Avenue, and then between Hazelwood Street and White Bear Avenue. It did not include the major area of residential development that's occurred kind of in the northwest quadrant. It's more focused on the commercial area that exists in the Birch Run Station area around Maplewood Mall. It is close to regional trails, as is shown here in blue, the Bruce Vento Regional Trail. However, there isn't a lot of interior trails or connections, so one element that is discussed and shown in the North End plan is to try and continue a trail through this area to try and increase connectivity to the Bruce Vento Trail, which does a good job of north-south connectivity in Ramsey County. The North End area currently is really dominated by auto-oriented retail. The uses are spread out with vast parking areas in between, and there's not a lot of pedestrian connectivity or bicycle connectivity. There is a lot of urban heat islands, so some of the strategies are trying to reduce or change the dynamic of what is there today and build on that in the future. All right, I'm going to jump into the vision for the North End. As I referenced, the North End vision first came to be as part of the 2040 comprehensive plan that was adopted in 2019. The comprehensive plan recognized that this area already was a mixture of uses and that the long-term goal for the area would be mixed use. So it was guided for a mixed use community, which is the more intensive mixed use for the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan identified the ability to have commercial, retail, service, businesses, offices, and high density residential uses. The hope again was to create a pedestrian and bicycle friendly area. So seeking active ground floor uses, supporting transit investments. So this area looked at a higher density per acre than other areas of the community. The flexibility was established in the comprehensive plan. It really didn't specify exactly where uses had to go or the level of mixture between residential and commercial. So the intention was to provide a lot of flexibility for property owners to look into the future of how they want to use their particular process or properties, I mean. Then it was also identified a need for more planning to occur in this area to try in particular support the transit investments, recognize the value that the Maplewood Mall retail area and St. John's Hospital brought to this area and look about how things could be transformed into the future. So that led to the North End Vision Plan, which was adopted later in 2019. And the North End Vision Plan looked at, you can see what the vision statement is. It's identified this area as a local and regional economic activity center and really talks about the diverse mix of land uses and that people can come for goods and services, wellness, work, recreation, socialization, learning, and living. So it's implementing the guidance from the 2040 comprehensive plan. The North End Vision Plan was a plan, so it didn't specifically identify the regulatory elements that would make the plan become a reality, which is what we're focused on today. The long-term plan, which is what is shown as a graphic here, shows a possible full development of the North End area. However, it doesn't specifically say that the uses have to be located in the areas that are shown. So this is an example of what could happen. The city has really been interested in providing flexibility in terms of exactly where residential or office or hotel or retail would be located. So that's one of the outcomes of the North End District, is to not be as prescriptive as one might think is identified in the North End plan. The design guidelines really focused on helping achieve this long-term plan by identifying street design, building design, and open space design. And the North End Vision Plan was really the foundation that we used in the development of the actual North End District. And that's why, and I'll talk about it in a minute, we have actual regulations and guidelines. And we took those elements that seem to be most important to the city to try and guide how development would reoccur or occur in this area. Approach to the new district. So as I've referenced a few times, but just to make sure it's clear, the approach to this new district was looking at flexibility in terms of uses and phasing. It does use an approach with regulating plans, and I'll talk through what those are in a moment, but generally regulating plans identify specific elements within the district and then provide regulations based on the differences between those things. And so I'll give you an example in a moment. Then we have design standards, street design, site design, and building design. And then as I mentioned a minute ago, there's also design guidelines, which is a separate document. So in terms of flexibility, a variety of uses are permitted. The district does not specifically say where these uses may be. It just says these are all the types of uses that are allowed. And if you actually go into the district, there's a long list of uses, but generally we're looking at townhouses or row houses, apartments, or mixed use buildings with residential over other uses, institutional or civic uses, and then commercial uses, retail, services, offices, hotel. So again, continuing the retail kind of focus of this area. As I said earlier, development phasing wise, we do recognize that development will happen over time. There's so many different property owners that it's unlikely that the entire area would develop at once. So we do require new development and redevelopment to follow the standards of the new North End District. However, there is a provision in the code being proposed that would allow for the expansion of existing structures or existing parking lots as long as it doesn't conflict with the proposed future street network, which we'll see in just one moment, and as long as it meets existing non-residential development standards. So the hope was to support the existing businesses, but then be ready when future redevelopment would be proposed, that we had guidelines that would move things forward in the direction and the vision of the city. So in terms of regulating plans, this is the street types regulating plans. And as I referenced, the goal is to provide regulations that are based on street types. So while a traditional zoning district might regulate based on uses or districts, this looks at what are the types of streets that we have and provides regulations based on what type of street does your development front. So there are minor arterials and major collectors, which would include Beam and White Bear Avenue and County Road D. Then we have local connectors, and those are kind of the major streets. Some of these are the continuation of, for example, of Legacy Avenue. You can see the dotted blue line, or they might be the existing streets, the north-south streets that connect between County Road D and Beam Avenue. The neighborhood Main Street is really what is anticipated to be the focus of district activity. So these are the streets that we're primarily focused on relative to pedestrian and bicycle connectivity. We anticipate that active uses would want to be fronted on this street and that people would be moving along these street corridors. And then neighborhood internal streets are intended to provide site access. And while we mostly are thinking they will be city streets, we also could see instances where a private street may be appropriate, for example, in a townhouse development or between two multifamily developments or buildings of the same development. So you can see this is following the North End Vision Plan. The city has primarily focused on the local connectors and neighborhood main streets in terms of where those are laid out and how they make the connections. And then there's a little bit more flexibility as you move down to the neighborhood internal streets. Some of them may be located and some may not, may never be created. But this at least gives a general framework for the types of streets and how they might be laid out within this area. And then the framework also includes an open space network and types regulating plan. And this, as I mentioned, is to try and do a better connection between or within the area. There are some park areas east of White Bear Avenue, and obviously there is the Bruce Vento Trail on the west, and there is also the green and park space within Legacy Avenue or the Legacy Village area. So this follows the vision plan in identifying a greenway corridor of some type moving through the district, as well as some neighborhood park locations and some pocket park locations. The neighborhood park is intended to kind of be in these three general areas. The pocket parks may move, but these are kind of the general sense of where they would be located. And again, guidelines are developed, or regulations are developed specifically related to these three types of parks. Any questions before I move into design standards?
Here's one. Are we seeing a demand for a hotel? And that's from Danielle, and I can touch on that. We know that a lot of users in the neighborhood have a desire for a hotel. We know as a city that's a priority, that we would like a use for a hotel. Market studies have shown generally that when we were doing the vision study, the vision plan development, that a hotel could be supported. You know, where our market study wasn't done specifically just on the use of hotels, but we do believe that there is a demand and a market, and more importantly, support for a hotel in this district.
Move forward through the design standards, and then we'll take a pause again. So as I referenced, the different design standards, some of them are based on the street types. So the street design standards, this is just an example. The graphic is of a boulevard zone. And so the idea of trying to create a comfortable place for bikers and walkers, and then even as you can see, where it's appropriate next to retail, you might have an active front yard area, or you might have an active area for the multifamily residential for where people feel like they can be sitting in an area. And so we have tried to identify the relationship between the public and the private space. And that's part of the street design standards. And each street has different types of right-of-way widths that are recommended in street design standards. And then relative to building placement, we have identified specific standards, what we're calling a build to zone. And the idea of rather having a specific setback that every building needs to be at 10 feet, 15 feet as a minimum, we give a range that identifies that the building needs to be, for example, 5 to 15 feet from the property line. And that allows some flexibility with where a building is placed, but keeps everything about the same, which really provides a comfort level. The buildings in this district will generally be located closer to the street with parking behind or to the side. Again, the idea of people are much more comfortable, much more engaged with buildings when they are located closer to the street. And there is a table within the actual standards that lays out the differences between the types of street. So the neighborhood street frontage, for example, will have buildings closer to the street. There is recognition along Beam and White Bear, which are those higher order streets, that setbacks will need to look a little bit different because that isn't really a street where there's as much pedestrian activity. So we have made some differences between the streets. Again, building placement standards, we also have a minimum side yard of 5 feet and a minimum yard of rear yard of 5 feet. So that's fairly straightforward. We do also have included in this district a minimum amount of street frontage. So that's trying to ensure that a minimum amount of the actual building is located closer to the street. So we recognize that you need to have driveways, sometimes you need alleys, sometimes you need loading areas. Not every part of the building can 100% be adjacent to the street, but we have it adjusted based on the street type. So the streets where we want more pedestrian activity, we're going to have a higher percentage of the building that needs to be towards the street. Those that are kind of located in other zones, maybe we have that percentage reduced. We also have a recognition for corner lots that we look at the type of street, and one of the streets will be the primary street frontage, and that one will be required to have the higher amount of building towards the street, and then we reduce that amount down as there are other street types. So we're trying to make adjustments as we need to support redevelopment, but still create the pedestrian-friendly environment that we're looking for. Off-street parking and loading, I referenced the fact that we're looking at having side and rear parking areas. So there are a required number of parking spaces, a min and a max. These have been adjusted from what the city has currently in other areas. It's been something that we've been looking at to try and reduce parking standards a little bit in this area to recognize the transit availability, recognize the fact that we're trying to create a pedestrian-friendly environment. But we do also include maximum spaces, again, because we're not trying to encourage as much auto orientation as it has been done in the past. There is also required bicycle parking standards. There is screening standards, and those screening standards really are referenced to try and produce that kind of environment that we're looking for. And those screening standards are primarily focused on those rear parking areas and how they interact with the street. Building design standards, this graphic tries to identify the different types of building design standards that are included. I won't walk through each one of them. We can dive into the code if there's a specific question, but there are, for example, minimum and maximum building height requirements. Again, we're trying to be a more dense area, and so we don't necessarily want to have a sea of one-story buildings. We're trying to encourage efficient use of the land, and so we have min and max building height. We do have an upper floor step back, again, to reduce that tunnel effect or reduce too tall of buildings kind of overwhelming the pedestrian environment. There is a maximum building length that we require articulation, as you can see on the side, the street facade articulation. So we do have the kind of standard building design requirements to try and focus the efforts on creating a building environment that is attractive to the street and really emphasizes that pedestrian environment. And we can certainly, if there are specific questions, we can have the code available to look at the specific requirements. But given the different street frontage types, it was hard to do a table that included everything in a way that was easily understandable in a short presentation. I've talked about those. I also wanted to reference the design guidelines. As we said, there will be a North End district created, and that is where the actual regulations are included, and those are done in much more of a standard ordinance format. There is also the North End District Design Guidelines. That's a document that is just encouraging additional elements that the city didn't feel like they wanted to make as standards or requirements. But developers and property owners are encouraged to use it because the staff will be using that to describe or to reference for the Planning Commission and the City Council about where those guidelines were incorporated. It also has some graphics that are nice to kind of illustrate the types of building or the types of development that the city wants. These topics are a little bit different or more detailed in areas that we didn't feel like the standards could go into. All of these elements are taken from the North End Vision Plan, which had a lot of guidelines and standards. And so we've narrowed it down to kind of the ones that seem the most important to the community, to the city in moving forward. So this document is available as well on the website if you haven't checked it out. And I do have a copy with us today as well, if we wanted to take a look at it. I'm going to stop here. So there's some questions.
So the question, does the city have a plan in place for offering incentives to property owners or developers for redevelopment? And the answer to that is the city council is working as the EDA. So in Maplewood, the city council serves as the economic development authority. And so we are working with them on a systematic plan for the city. There's other needs in the city as well as the North End. And it's going to be a case-by-case basis. We have a couple areas within the North End I think that we would probably focus on at the beginning, and the city wants to be a partner. Resources obviously are not unlimited, so it's going to be a case-by-case unique basis for projects. So we would work with property owners and developers, figure out where those gaps are, where our visions align and maybe where they don't align, and see what we can fill in. But there's likely not going to be just a North End program that you apply to and we have funding available that way. It's going to be more ad hoc. The other question that I think I can answer, or I think is more geared towards the city, is there a plan to condemn property in order to provide for greenways and wider sidewalks? And again, everything in the North End Vision Plan is intended to be a partnership, working with the developer and working with property owners to enact this vision. It's not the city coming in and forcing property owners into the vision. So when properties redevelop, there are elements like the greenways and sidewalks that we would look to, again, coordinate and work together on. Sidewalk, that's not a new policy to the city. For most commercial areas within the city, if you don't have a sidewalk in front of your property and you redevelop, the city's going to work with you to put that sidewalk in. I can think of a couple properties that have recently developed on the south side of Beam where this has been the case in the last few years. So that's something that we would continue forward with.
Relative to the last question of minimum and maximum heights and floors, in front of you, based on the street type, is the idea of the minimum building height of 2 stories for most of the areas, and then a maximum building height of 6 to 8 stories, depending upon where it's located. Most of the development, if you remember from the graphic, is going to be in the neighborhood main street, neighborhood internal street area. The minor arterial major collector is County Road D, Beam, those requirements. And then you can also see the step back. The step back is required above 4 stories on the local connector and the major minor arterial major collector, and then 3 stories neighborhood main street. And then I think there was a question about, unfortunately, I don't know if I understand completely, what kind of redevelopment thresholds are you considering with respect to existing buildings? Is it the question, I assume, of how much can happen before redevelopment is required? I think that's what the question may be getting at. And I think the idea is if it can meet standards, for expansion, that it can happen. But if it's true redevelopment, then it is moved into these new standards.
What we're saying is for existing buildings to be able to expand on your existing property, as long as you can meet the existing conditions today. So all these properties are zoned business commercial. And if you can do that in such a way, and again, it's not like a tear down and completely refresh of the site. We're talking about additions onto building. And as long as you can still meet, again, the business commercial zoning standards, then you're going to be fine. But as soon as you tip over to it's a redevelopment of the site, again, whether it's a new building or you can't meet the business commercial standards anyway, then we would be looking to apply this new ordinance.
And then the last question from Peter. The city is not intending to be limiting new tenant build-outs or directing specifically what happens on the property. It's more about trying to provide guidance when redevelopment is ready to occur. And so there isn't something that is in this regulation that specifies what can happen. If you have a casualty like a fire and you want to rebuild, you need to develop in accordance with the ordinance. Typically, you can rebuild if there's been a fire, but we probably need to add some more clarity in the ordinance about that specifically. Michael and Elizabeth, if you have specific knowledge of exactly how you would handle that, feel free.
I think it would probably be a good idea to reference our non-conforming ordinance code in this new section of the code as well, unless there's something else that we feel would be more appropriate. But meaning legal non-conforming uses that were established prior to this this code that we're proposing would be able to rebuild if it was a casualty such as fire.
Is the mall going to be torn down?
No, probably, and definitely not from the anything to do with the city. So, a large part of why this plan, the ultimate vision plan, was developed and now the ordinance is being enacted is to work with the mall and help the mall succeed and stay vital to the neighborhood. So I would expect the mall and other parts of this district to change over time, but it's our every intention and expectation that there will continue to be a Maplewood Mall for a very long time.
Please continue to ask questions. Just for everybody's time, I'm just going to talk about kind of where we are in the process and next steps, and then we are happy to continue the conversation, or I'm happy to bring up the actual code similar to what we've done. So we are in the process right now of answering questions based on the letters that were sent out to have this meeting, and then there's also an in-person meeting that will mirror today's meeting at the end of the month. Once everybody is comfortable, there will actually be a formal public hearing notice to consider the establishment of the new district. So we wanted to make sure that you were aware that you will likely get another notice about this. We wanted to do the informal to make sure that we had addressed people's concern. The conversation today is really helpful for us to go back and look and make sure that we've adequately answered the questions that are going to be coming up and that we know how we're going to handle what may be coming forward. So at some point, there'll be a formal public hearing notice, and then there'll be a public hearing held at the Planning Commission, and then consideration for approval by the City Council. At this point, the hope is to identify this over the next few months. And so this is a process that will be continuing. As I said, we have the meeting at the end of the month. We'll take all those consideration and then start working through the process with the Planning Commission and the City Council. So anticipate that the website will be continuing to update with new information. And then once there's an official formal public hearing, you will receive notice about that. But in the meantime, we're open to questions and clarifications, and we really appreciate having those conversations so that we make sure that we create a district that really can support existing businesses and then support redevelopment as it may come down into the future. The next question, I think, is who do you reach out to? Michael Martin, who introduced and has been answering, and Elizabeth as well, are both great people to reach out to. So if there's specific questions, these are your folks. If you haven't been to the city's website on this topic, I would believe it was listed in the information that was sent out. That has a form of this presentation that you can watch on YouTube or suggest other people watch. It also has the actual documents available for you to take a look at as well. This last question, are there developers who have expressed an interest in this area? Probably is better answered for you.
There have been, there's not a specific project that's been proposed or that the city is reviewing at this time. Everyone on this call is probably well-versed on what properties might be out there, what might be up for lease or sale. And so we're aware of that too. And yeah, there's definitely interest in this neighborhood. It's still the benefit of this project is that we're working with a commercial district in a neighborhood that's that is vibrant. There is a vibrancy to it, and we're trying to build off that and continue it forward, so it stays strong. So there definitely is developer interest, and we hope with this new ordinance that again, developers will have even a clearer point of view of what the city intends to have in development moving forward.
With that ends what we were intending to present, though we're happy to dive into any of those areas for you. If there's additional questions, we can certainly answer them. I can bring up the different documents to walk through, but we appreciate your time today. I don't want you to stay on if you had your questions answered. And again, to a reminder, there is the meeting at the end of the month. If you think of questions between now and then, we'll be at Maplewood Mall on the morning of the 25th. At 7:30 to answer more questions and to provide the similar presentation. Again, there's nothing different between the meeting. We just wanted an in-person and a virtual option to hopefully meet people's schedules and their preferences in terms of the conversation. Assuming the public is behind the district, what is the estimated time to creation? Given the fact that it is redevelopment based and private property initiated, we're assuming it's going to take a number of years. In order to create, because it's up to developers, property owners to take the initiative. So it won't be a short-term project.
The zoning ordinance itself will be in creation by this fall, but this isn't city-led. Will be developer and property owner led. So as Rita mentioned, we're thinking long-term. The vision plan, if you get a chance to, and if you haven't yet, it talks in terms of 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And so those are realistic timeframes for some of the elements that we're talking about here. We hope that there's some action quicker on some elements in the neighborhood, but this is a zoning district and a vision for the long haul for this district.
So assuming that there isn't a major concern, the anticipation, just to clarify, like the question clarified, was this fall. There isn't a specific timeline for the public hearing because we need to get the notices out, but the hope is by the end of the year, this district will have been created and available to property owners.
That's what we have prepared. So on behalf of Rita, Elizabeth, and Jeff Thompson, who's also with us, our Community Development Director, I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time. Please reach out to us with any additional questions or comments or just wanting to discuss the district. And we'd love to see you if you are able to attend on August 25th at 7:30 at the Maplewood Mall to continue that. Like Rita said, nothing new will be presented. It will be the same information, but if you'd like to stop by and hear us out again, we'd love to see you.